All right, welcome to another expert interview. As always, we jump straight in, but depending on what platform you're on, make sure you like, subscribe, comment. It's the lifeblood of creating content. And if you have questions for our guest, it's a great way to have part two because we can jump on and dive really deep into the topics you want to talk about. So with that, Tom, why don't you tell us who you are, man, and what you do?
Sure. Tom Rusling. I've spent the last 19 years in progressive roles as marketing director, SEO consultant, and search marketing agency leader. So spent the last 5 years developing a software technology for SEO strategy called Audience Key, with kind of the basic idea of getting SEO projects out of spreadsheet hell and a place to really organize your keyword research and turn that into an actionable, implementable plan, and then be able to measure that. So kind of bringing all those pieces that people are using, a lot of disconnected spreadsheets, point tools, Google Docs, except project management pieces, and bring that all into one centralized strategic system.
That's awesome. So how do we get here? I know you have a cool story, and this is probably that story of we built it for ourselves and it works for others. But walk us on that journey. Tell us how we ended up with Audience Key.
Sure. So the background working in a few different places where we were focusing mostly on off-page link building and working with a plethora of large in-house teams and agencies. And we would constantly be asked, okay, we have a link building budget. Great, let's do it. What are your targets? We don't know. Can you help us figure that out? And it was like over and over and over again. And these were like agencies that are pretty buttoned up and kind of best of breed. And I started to see that just consistent request. So we started to kind of add that in as kind of a free service because you want the link building to work, but started to see that there was just this kind of lack of strategy over and over and over again. So I ended up spinning off from one of those agencies and starting a professional services company called Reflexive Media. And we really started to grasp onto that idea of not just doing keyword research, but thinking about keywords as filling in kind of a database of intentions for a target audience. And if we got really aggressive with our keyword research and we started to think about like every single way an addressable audience is looking for information, we could start to think about that as a database of intentions. And then if we can take that data and kind of put it into a really well-structured system and slice and dice all that, you can really use that almost like market research and get into the headspace of an audience. And that can inform how you're going to figure out your whole content architecture and your content strategy. So that really turned into a robust keyword mapping process. And we were doing that, just like I said earlier, in spreadsheets, Google Docs, point tools. And the process got more and more sophisticated, and the spreadsheets got more and more crazy. So it became difficult to have uniformity across projects and, even internal team members being consistent with what they were doing and how they were structuring things. It was becoming difficult for clients to like easily and readily interpret what we were proposing to do. And you had all kinds of things like version control. It got to the point where I feel like our strategists were spending 80% of their time managing and upkeeping data instead of being strategic. And it was just screaming for technology. So just like you said, Devin, it was one of those moments where it was let's take a really good process that was a bit arduous and bring technology in to kind of smooth that out and facilitate it. So the process we were doing, it worked great. It was expensive to do because it was so time intensive. So the only place we could really do that effectively was for larger SEO budgets. And so we started to go in and build technology. It started just as a keyword mapping system. And what's interesting is no one's really built keyword mapping software. And as I started to kind of look for it, I was like, wow, I can't believe it. No one's really done that. And I'm sure a lot of people listening have come across, here, like learn about keyword mapping and we'll give you this free, download of a keyword mapping Excel template. Well, I started to look at a lot of those, and they felt very incomplete as well. So I knew the spreadsheets that we had developed and innovated over a couple of years seemed to have some special things that I wasn't seeing other places. But again, it was still very difficult to do that process. So long story short, the keyword mapping software got built. And then it was like, well, we want to be able to connect that to our content briefs. So let's start building content brief software that attaches to the keyword mapping. And it just kind of went from there until we kind of ended up with a system that creates keyword mapping software, which I can get into the advantages of that over something like Excel, that then translates that into a content brief automatically. Anytime you add or change your mappings, the content brief updates, and then starting to piece in rank tracking technology. So you could bring in the SERP features and your rankings, and your competitor rankings, and put that all into one place that was dynamically updating. And from there, it just kind of went. So we added in workflow features. So you could kind of know what are the statuses of your page ideas, of your content briefs, assignability to writers and strategists. And then the last piece was building in technology to actually benchmark content on, let's say, a page you want to optimize, and bring all that in and create a kind of a baseline of that data, and then create a kind of a side-by-side workflow to go and optimize an existing piece and be able to see the before and after. And then bring in natural language processing technology that could start to score the content for how well it was following the keyword mapping strategy initially.
That's
So
awesome.
that was just kind of this evolution. You start with one thing and then you go, well, I need the next thing. And eventually what it becomes is like a very kind of end-to-end holistic SEO like strategy, like tech enablement, I should say, for SEO strategy.
And it's built from a need, right? And I love that about your story. I know when I was talking to you the first time, is like, that's the why, right? That's why it works. And I think a lot of SaaS companies try to solve a problem that doesn't exist. Like, it happens. There's so many SaaS companies out there selling something that on the face level seems awesome, but as you dig in, you're like, I don't know if we needed this solution. And
Right.
I think when you build it from, no, I need the solution because
I
we
need
built
this.
this system and I can't find a resource. And so I'm going to perfect it because it matches. Like, that already is a testament to what you guys have created, because you're a power user, right?
Right. And every day, it informs us by using it. And then you start to bring in other marketing teams, other agencies, and you get to know what they're looking for and what their pain points are. And you start to see, well, each agency, for example, has some slightly different like needs or pain points, but you also start to see the commonalities. And one thing you don't see when you're running an agency, you don't talk to other agencies about like, what do you do? So one of the things I have seen is there's a real lack of best practices and there's kind of standardization to like the SEO strategic process. But the agencies and teams that are doing this most effectively are definitely leaning on kind of keyword mapping being core to their process. So one of the other takeaways was that we started to go like, why is this so difficult? In a lot of cases, people profess that they're doing it, and when you start getting into the details, they're not really doing it. And it's because it's too arduous. The software aspect of this just makes it so much faster and more efficient that you can really adhere to that keyword mapping process as core. And the other thing is it started to allow us to bring, I would say, an enterprise level sophisticated solution down market to kind of like mid and even lower market SEO programs, just because like the time savings was so significant. So yeah, it started like that. It was a need. It served us, and then started to get other people going, oh, wow, I'd love to use this. Is this available? So we did that kind of classic pivot of, an internal tool or system and pivoting that to something that's a usable product, for outside users.
So let's talk about SEO. So I mean, if you're an agency, you probably have one level of sophistication. If you're an end user or an e-com platform, maybe a different level of sophistication. So I mean, keyword research I think is talked about a lot. You mentioned that like there's a lot of tools and resources on SERP analysis and finding the right keywords. And obviously we have some friends that own companies that are all in the long tail world. So you do that. We have awesome data. You maybe you've even done competition analysis. So talk to us specifically about mapping. Like, what is it and why is it important to your strategy?
Sure. So one of the golden rules of SEO is that outside of like a branded keyword, you're typically going to have at best one page on a website that is going to be ranking for a term. And so the idea with keyword mapping is you find the important terms that are relevant to your target audience, and then you kind of identify what page on my website should be the page that's ranking for that term and that group of terms. One of two things happens. Either you potentially have multiple pages on a site that are kind of unintentionally crafted around the same terms and you're blurring and competing against yourself, or you don't really have a page to map to, so you need to map it to a page that needs to be created. So once you find all your relevant target terms and you go through a mapping process, at the end of the day, there are mapped pages you have or pages that you need to create. The pages you have, it informs how you're going to assess how that page currently supports those keyword terms and what your rankings are. And so from there, it really informs like decisions on how to do that better. When you bring in ranking data into the mix, you can start to see what is the ranking URL of a keyword term and what is the mapped plan. So your mapping is like your ideal state. The ranking is your reality today, with Google. And you can start to see where either the keyword mapping and the ranking URL are mismatched, or where the ranking URL is bouncing around. That's a really clear sign of blurring. So at the end of the day, that's how you can go and optimize what you have. And then everyone wants to know, well, what are my content gaps? Well, if you're bringing in all the relevant terms and you're mining your competitor data and you're mapping that out, and you start to see, oh, I really don't have an explicit page for this group of terms, you can start to map those out. And at the end of the day, you're going to have a whole host of pages you need to create, and that's your content strategy to fill in those gaps. The last part is if you start with that, especially like on a website, if you're overhauling it, kind of revamping it from the ground up, or starting a new site from scratch, if you take all that keyword data and you start to map that out, you can start to figure out your content architecture. And that's a really big thing. I see a systematic, I think, misguided strategy with people trying to build out super kind of long form content posts, and they'll try to have all kinds of different subterms supported on one page that can have 3, 4, 5,000 words of content on it. And what you really want to do is a lot of times turn these large pages maybe and think about them like a section of content where you're going to have a parent page and then you're going to have a bunch of sub child pages that are going to be more explicit, more consumable. And I think that's good for users and it's good for search engines. So once you kind of go through that process, it also informs you how to kind of structure your content architecture. That brings in, once you've kind of gone through that, a logical way for your taxonomy, your breadcrumbing, your navigation, all those things.
I like that we're digging in. And I think a lot of the conversations and content around SEO are so surface level, or it's like, go create content. Well, okay, cool. but
Right.
but what with intent, right? And I love that you
Right.
talk about, like, I've seen a lot of these super long form pieces of content, and you're like, one, that's not even digestible. So you're only writing it for Google. And even then, it's probably not working as best as it could. And so, yeah, I think that there's a lot of nuggets in there. If you are actively thinking about your website, your content, your flow, there's a lot of nuggets in there. So let's talk. specifically e-commerce, because I know that there's some tricks and tips there. So what are like 1 to 3 things an e-commerce business should think about when it comes to either your tool or SEO in general?
Yeah, I'll just speak to SEO in general. So if you go through that mapping process, you're not just, putting keywords to a URL page. You're thinking about what kind of a page is that. And so like in our system, you can organize all your pages by page type. So are they product detail pages? Are they category or subcategory pages, etc.? Depending on the e-commerce type, sometimes there's a lot of very similar products from a targeting perspective, or there's products that churn very quickly versus other e-commerce that kind of have a set defined number of products, and those are more or less evergreen. When you get into having a lot of very similar products, it gets difficult to try to really optimize your product pages. You want to start thinking about bringing those together into some type of category or, subcategory. And so one of the main things is to be thinking about that. How do you really build out a lot of mid to long tail category pages? And you don't have to clutter your user interface and your navigation. You can kind of have your main categories for someone who's coming into the homepage, but building out a whole bunch of search intent backed long tail categories can be really effective for e-commerce.
That's an awesome nugget. And to your point, understand the UI and how a user is going to navigate the site, and that can stay clean, but you can still have all these things
Right.
operating that are indexing and still flowing and could be part of the breadcrumbs, but the user may not even know that. They may just click an item and end up, but if they look up at the breadcrumbs, they may see, oh, there are a bunch of subcategories driving me here. That's a cool takeaway. And yeah, I love that.
There's one more aspect to it as well, which is you're starting to create different groupings of products with these longer tail category pages. And that's driving more internal link association to those product detail pages. So it also really helps with your internal link flow when you do that correctly.
That's awesome. So let's talk AI. This came up on I've done 2 podcasts today. This came up on the first one. We have to talk about it. I feel like if we're going to talk about marketing, it's a conversation. So I guess give me the AI answer with an SEO hat, right? So if we're thinking SEO, like what is AI doing, or what do you think it's going to do?
So from the perspective of running SEO programs, or from how it's going to change search behavior?
Kind of either. Yeah, whatever topic you think is most relevant or that you're most interested in.
Well, I'll start from the SEO practitioner side. So obviously, this is the highly discussed topic right now. And people are starting to realize it's not taboo to use have support from like generative AI content machines, but you really need to, I like the term that I've heard thrown around of like an AI sandwich. So people are the bread. You need humans on the front side. You can use AI in the middle and then put humans on the backside. I think the AI, it certainly makes writing faster. It removes all kinds of writer block in the testing and kind of noodling around we've done, and we use it in some places. It's really just to get something out there that can then be more like handcrafted thereafter. So there's all kinds of levels of people using it and abusing it and using it correctly. But what we're focused on right now, and we get asked, are you bringing AI into audience key? Our current thinking is no, but we've got all like the keyword information, a lot of data. We're working more on helping to create the prompting for people. Because I think what also is already starting to happen is people are starting to have preferences of which AI content generating system they even want to use. So I think the thing that's more consistent is the prompting. And so that's kind of where we're focused on things. How it's going to actually change the way that search is conducted, by the end users, and what that means for the SEO industry. Well, I mean, Google just made a pretty big announcement, right? I'm I'm interested in how Google's going to integrate AI and chat with their kind of standard search results and how they're going to keep their monetization in place. Because as disruptive as that sounds for SEOs, potentially, you have to wonder like how Google's going to do that because that's their lifeblood, right? So, but I don't have a lot of answers. I think I like everyone. I've got a lot of questions.
Well, and I think it's kind of the common takeaway right now is if you're in the industry, pay attention. If you're a business owner, pay attention. Now, what are
Yeah,
you paying attention to? Just pay attention because
right.
something will pivot. And I love that you talk about the sandwich approach. That's a great analogy. I haven't heard it like that, but it fits. Is someone has to prompt, and then you need to add voice on the back end, right? You need to add your perspective or your language. And I work with a local service company, and we built like a FAQ, SAQ, should ask question strategy. And then he went and used the AI to get rid of the writer's block and generate all of the middle in your analogy. And then
Mm-hmm.
he added some perspective to for himself on the front, cleaned up the language, and then added in his unique perspective for his service, his market, his why. But he was able to produce so much content so much quicker,
Mm-hmm.
and but it's still relevant. And that was his struggle. Is he's like, well, how do I make it unique? And I'm like, well, you just read it, but then you make it you, right? So his example is a floor care company. It's like, well, we do steam cleaning, and it's like, well, you don't do steam cleaning, right? So you do this other cleaning. So when it says that, you could say, yes, that's an option. However, we blah blah blah, and now all of a sudden it's unique, right? it fits your business.
Yep. And you're adding your perspective and expertise. And that's what ultimately Google has been saying, right? Is they're now starting to take a position that using AI generation isn't bad as long as it's helping to make something that's, you know, useful and helpful.
For sure. So let's talk SaaS, right? So you're in the SaaS space,
Mm-hmm.
coming from a service business, right? So
Right.
what lessons have you learned building a SaaS company that if someone's thinking about doing it or maybe they're walking down the same path, what are some lessons you've learned as a SaaS business that are worth sharing?
Yeah, we were given really good advice from a guy named Mike Roberts, is the founder of SpyFu, as we started to set this out and building. We knew it was an agency, product, but something that we thought eventually might be standalone. And his advice, which we tried to follow, but still sometimes even knowing it stumbled, is if you're going to build an agency tool, you can put all kinds of cool buttons and solve for little weird edge cases and all these things. If you're building something that's going to be SaaS and a product, you have to be so careful about every feature that you care to add because it starts to turn things into complex. So you have to keep it really, really simple and streamlined in that. And so and what we're doing is it's a complex process. So, at times I think we've followed that advice well. At other times I think we've had to kind of come back and go, oh, that's starting to get a little too nuanced, a little too complex.
I think that's great advice though, because I think scope creep is real when you're looking in the SaaS world, right? And I think we have the ability to like, oh, what if, or oh, we should, and you end up in all these rabbit holes, and all of a sudden, like the core product's not the core product, and you've missed it, right? And so, like, I think that's really sage advice if someone's looking to scope, like what is the MVP, right? The minimum viable product you can take to
Mm-hmm.
market. And then if you're going to add on, make sure it truly supports the majority of your use cases.
That's right. Yep. I think it's always easy to hone in on your mistakes rather than what you did right. I think one of the other things I would do differently, next go around, is I'd be thinking about the permissioning levels and the user types very carefully, like from the very beginning. So we didn't do that. We were just thinking like, how do we get this, and do the things we want to do. And then we had to kind of stop, back up, and almost press pause on new features for many, many, many months to reconfigure all like the permissioning levels and user types, etc. So that could have been a lot more effective had we done that up front and thought about kind of, kind of backwardsing things in a little bit better.
Yeah, I've seen I've seen and had that conversation a few times, right? Because it like boiling that down to someone who may be thinking of starting or maybe you're in it is like if you're gonna have 7 features, and the conversation we had offline was like, well, what if I want a simplified version or a trial version or a discounted version that allows users to get into the platform and test viability before expanding into the full platform? All of that has to do with permissioning. And so if you didn't build that in, now you got to go backwards and start figuring out like, well, how do I eliminate access, and how do I only show this dashboard piece, and how do I trigger a prompt? And like all of a sudden it's like, man, we're rebuilding a lot of this.
Yeah, that's right. And also if you think about that up front, it shapes your thinking better. So, and I'll tell you, I've spoken with other SaaS entrepreneurs and was speaking with one who was able to sell the business and have a nice exit, but he said the same thing. Like they kind of ran into this problem and they were so deep into it that they kept knowing it was a problem, but they couldn't stop to go back. And he said we would have been way more successful had we been able to do it, but we got too deep into that. And that was like, so it was interesting to hear. And I've heard this kind of, like you're saying, a few people saying kind of similar things. So
That's awesome. Well, I think it's a great nugget, and I think it's something that is relatable, right? If you're in the software space, you're thinking about it, like that's something to consider. So I like to ask 2 questions to kind of wrap up. So let me ask the first one. So recommended reading, is there a book that you love and resonates with you, or just a book that you recommend everyone reads?
Interesting. Right now, I guess I can only speak to the books I'm kind of in the middle of. So I'm reading one on just building your brand and kind of like storytelling. I'm trying to even remember the name of it. I've got it on my bedside, but it's really, I think, to be honest, I don't read enough books. I listen to a lot of podcasts.
Sweet. Is there a podcast you recommend then? I mean, that's fine. There's a lot of people who are doing, listening based learning. So is there
Yeah.
a podcast you lean on a lot?
Yeah, I've been listening a lot to Webcology lately. They're kind of a smaller audience, but like get into very expert level subjects.
Sweet.
So,
Okay.
yep, that's been a good one. And
Yeah, I love
then,
that. It's always interesting because you never know. Like, I mean, I have the bookshelf behind me and I have a lot of books, but I find myself listening to more audio content as well, or even the audiobook version, because it maximizes that car time.
yeah,
Or while you're working on something that's kind of repetitive, you can just have it going and pick up the nuggets. So yeah, I
right.
think that's awesome.
I will say, going back to the book thing, probably one of the most influential books for my marketing career was actually Blink. And it wasn't written as a marketing book, but it's entirely about marketing. And I mean, it's a well-read, well-written book. Probably a lot of people are familiar with it or have read it. But if you haven't, that's the one book I've given to every employee that's come in and said,
Love,
if you haven't read this, you kind of have to read this.
love that. So talk to me about advice for your younger self, right? So if you look back at your journey, what's something you would tell the younger you?
The younger me, it's an interesting question. I think at an earlier time, I wish I had been probably more open to finding like a very good technical partner. I'm a marketer. I don't write code. I had a lot of ideas that I just wasn't able to actualize at an earlier date because I didn't have that really good partner in crime who could kind of do the other side of things. And I think I've got that now. I wish I had had that 15 years ago. I think it's really, it empowers you, and it's on the other side of the coin. The really talented developers often need that kind of product and marketing person to work with. So if you can find that combination, kind of that John and Paul mix, so to speak, I think you're well off. And I wish I had done that earlier.
For sure. How do people get a hold of you? What's the way they can connect with the company or connect with you personally?
Sure. So audienckey.com, you can get in touch with us there. We offer a free trial for anyone, and we're very liberal with our Calendly links. So if anyone wants to just connect and have a 15-minute discussion, pretty wide open to that. Outside of that, I'm generally on LinkedIn. So Tom Rusling, Rusling, and people can certainly connect with me there.
Awesome. Well, Tom, I appreciate you, man. I think we covered a lot of topics from
Yeah.
SEO to strategy to marketing to AI. I mean, we really kind of hit a lot of different topics. If there's something you guys heard that you want us to dive into, I mean, we could probably create a whole podcast on each one of those topics. And so if there's something that resonates, let us know. I can call Tom back. We can hop back on and we can drive in real deep on one of the topics. But Tom, again, thanks for taking time, man. I know you guys are mid developing right now on some cool new features.
Yeah. Really appreciate it, Devin.